It was a calm Saturday morning when he stepped outside to grab his mail. The sun had just started to rise and the smell of freshly brewed coffee floated from a nearby house. He liked mornings like this, quiet, peaceful, no noise from the world. But that peace broke the moment he noticed a bright orange paper stuck to his mailbox. The color itself was enough to ruin his calm. He pulled it off and read the bold black letters. Violation notice, overgrown lawn. Beneath that, the Homeowners Association demanded that he trim his grass within 48 hours or face a fine. His eyebrows lifted. He looked at his lawn. It wasn't perfect, sure, but it wasn't bad either. The grass was maybe a little tall near the sidewalk, nothing serious. He had seen worse just down the street. Still, here was a warning like he had committed some kind of crime. He stood there for a while, trying to decide if he should laugh or get angry. It had only been 2 weeks since he moved into this neighborhood, and already the HOA was on his case. He sighed, folded the paper, and went inside. As he poured his coffee, he looked out the window at his front yard. The notice sat on the counter beside him like a reminder that peace was never free. By the afternoon, he decided to take care of it. He pulled out his old mower from the garage and started pushing it back and forth. The air was warm and the smell of cut grass filled the air. A couple of neighbors walked by and waved politely, but he noticed something in their eyes, a quiet kind of judgment, like they had been waiting for him to fix it. He smiled back anyway, pretending not to care. After finishing, he stood at the edge of his driveway and looked over his work. The grass was neat, trimmed, and even. He knew there was no reason anyone could complain now. He felt a small bit of pride, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and went back inside. That evening, he thought the issue was over, but 2 days later, another notice appeared. This time it said lawn edging not maintained properly. He stared at it in disbelief. They were serious. He had just mowed the lawn, done everything right, yet here they were again. He felt heat rise in his chest. He wasn't the type to get angry easily, but something about being told how to live in his own home hit him the wrong way. He walked down the street to take a look at other houses. Some had weeds near the fences. Others had grass longer than his ever was. No one else had bright orange papers stuck on their mailboxes. It didn't make sense. Was he being singled out? Or were they just this strict with everyone? The thought bothered him more than the notice itself. That night he sat on his porch, a cool drink in hand, watching the quiet street. Sprinklers clicked on somewhere in the distance and porch lights flickered one by one. It was a nice place, really. Clean, quiet, safe. But it also felt controlled, like every little thing had to fit into a perfect picture. And he wasn't sure he liked being part of that picture. The next morning he decided to talk to someone about it. Maybe the HOA office could clear it up. When he called, the woman on the phone spoke politely but coldly. She repeated the rules like a robot. No grass above 4 inches, proper edging, uniform appearance. When he asked how they decided which homes got warnings, she said, "We perform weekly inspections." He almost laughed. Weekly inspections for grass? Who had that kind of time? But he bit his tongue and thanked her for the information. A few days later, another letter arrived. This one wasn't orange but white, more official looking. It listed potential fines for non-compliance, and even hinted at possible legal action if violations continued. He placed the paper on his dining table and stared at it for a long time. It felt ridiculous. He had worked his whole life to own a home, only to be treated like a child being scolded for not cleaning his room. That weekend he went out to mow again, though this time his movements were slower. As he worked, he noticed a couple of board members driving by in a small golf cart making notes on a clipboard. They didn't even look at him. That more than anything made him angry. They saw him as a number, not a person. By the time the mower stopped, he had made up his mind. He wasn't going to let this continue without understanding what was really happening. If they wanted to play games, he would play too, but smarter. That evening, he did some digging online. He searched for information about his HOA, about how they operated and who was in charge. He found out they contracted a landscaping company that also handled reports of violations. That caught his attention. The same people trimming lawns were the ones reporting who wasn't maintaining theirs properly. That didn't sound right. As he read more, he saw complaints from other homeowners in nearby communities. They said the same thing, unfair fines, random violations, poor communication. It wasn't just him. The HOA had a reputation for being overly strict and unreasonably picky. Somehow that made him feel better. It wasn't personal, just a bad system. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. That night he lay awake thinking about it. He didn't want to be the kind of person who fought every little rule, but he also didn't want to live under people who thought they could control every inch of his property. There had to be a way to make a point. Something clever, something calm, but something that showed he wasn't afraid. He didn't know it yet. But this was the beginning of a small act of quiet rebellion that would change everything. For now, though, he simply went to bed with the sound of sprinklers outside and a single thought in his mind. If they wanted to teach him how to cut grass, he would make sure they learned who really owned the lawn. The next HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the park. He had never been inside before, but that evening he decided to go. He wanted to see the people behind the letters, the ones who kept sending warnings like they were doing him a favor. When he arrived, a few residents were already seated around a long table. There were snacks and papers spread out, and at the head of the table sat the HOA president, a man with a crisp shirt, neatly combed hair, and an expression that never seemed to soften. The meeting started with talk about community updates, painting fences, trash collection schedules, and new parking rules. He waited patiently, listening to neighbors complain about everything from barking dogs to delivery trucks. When they finally opened the floor for questions, he stood up. "I just want to understand something," he began calmly. "I received 2 violation notices in 1 week. I fixed the lawn both times, but I noticed other houses with worse yards didn't get anything. How does that work?" The room went quiet. The president leaned back in his chair, adjusting his glasses. "We perform regular inspections," he said, his tone rehearsed. "Every homeowner is expected to maintain the same standard. If others are in violation, they will be notified as well." "But that's the thing," he replied. "I walked down the street. Some lawns were way worse than mine. I'm not trying to argue, but it doesn't feel fair." The president smiled tightly, the kind of smile that wasn't friendly. "The HOA doesn't play favorites. Perhaps your yard stands out because it's on a corner lot. Visibility matters." He could feel his patience slipping, but he kept his voice even. "So I'm being fined because people can see my house better?" A few neighbors chuckled quietly. The president's smile faded. "We simply enforce the rules, sir. If you have a concern, you can file an appeal in writing. It will be reviewed by the board." He nodded slowly, realizing there was no point in arguing further. This wasn't about fairness. It was about control. He sat back down and listened to the rest of the meeting, though most of it was just talk about flower beds and fence colors. Still, he watched closely, noting how decisions were made. Everything went through the same small group of board members. They talked as if they owned the neighborhood. When the meeting ended, he walked outside into the cool night air. A few neighbors came up to him quietly. One older man patted him on the shoulder and said, "Good question in there. They've been like that for years." Another woman added, "Don't take it personally. The board likes to make examples." He thanked them and headed home. On the way, his mind was racing. He wasn't angry anymore. At least not the same kind of angry. It was more focused now, like a spark had turned into an idea. He wanted to know how deep this thing went, and maybe, just maybe, how he could turn it around. The next morning, he started asking questions. Not loudly, just in small conversations with neighbors. He learned that the HOA used the same landscaping company for all their maintenance. The company trimmed the grass around the community sign, cleaned up the park, and even handled violation reports. That part caught his attention. Why would a company that benefits from maintenance work also be the one reporting violations? It felt too convenient. He decided to find out more. A quick online search led him to the landscaping company's website. It was a small local business that prided itself on excellence and community standards. He called their number pretending to be a new customer interested in yard work. A friendly voice answered, and he asked casually, "Do you also work with HOAs?" "Yes, we handle contracts for several neighborhoods," the woman said. "We do regular maintenance and inspection reports." "Inspection reports?" he repeated. "So you're the ones who decide when a house gets a notice?" "Not exactly," she explained. "We submit the reports to the HOA and they decide which ones need action." That was enough for him to connect the dots. The HOA relied on their reports to issue warnings, which meant the landscaping company had a lot more power than most homeowners realized. That night, he sat at his desk, scribbling notes on a piece of paper. He wrote down everything he had learned: the inspection process, the board's decision-making, and the landscaping company's role. Then he leaned back and smiled faintly. If the HOA was going to keep using their rules against him, maybe he could use those same rules for himself. A few days later, he mowed the lawn again, making sure every edge was perfect. He trimmed the bushes, swept the driveway, and even cleaned the sidewalk. He didn't want to give them any more excuses. Then, just to test a theory, he waited. 3 days passed. No letters. 4, still nothing. On the 5th day, he saw the golf cart again. The same board members, clipboards in hand, driving slowly past his house. They looked at his lawn, then whispered something to each other. He waved politely. They didn't wave back. The next morning, another orange notice appeared. This time it said improper grass type, whatever that meant. He laughed when he read it. They were running out of reasons. He folded the paper carefully and placed it in a drawer. That was the moment he decided to stop reacting and start planning. He wasn't sure what his plan would be yet, but one thing was clear. They wanted control and he wanted peace. Maybe he could find a way to have both. That night, while scrolling online, he found an article about HOA laws and contracts. It mentioned something interesting. Homeowners had the right to review service contracts funded by their dues. That meant he could legally request a copy of the agreement between the HOA and the landscaping company. He smiled to himself. This wasn't over. The following week, he submitted a formal request to see the contract. The board delayed at first, saying it had to go through proper channels, but eventually, they sent him a copy. He studied every line of it. The landscaping company's contract was due to expire soon, and the HOA would need to renew or replace it. That gave him an idea, a bold one. He realized that if he couldn't beat the system, he might as well own it. The thought made him laugh out loud. He didn't know exactly how yet, but he could feel something shifting inside him. The quiet homeowner who once ignored HOA letters was gone. Now he was someone with a plan, and soon the people who sent him those notices would learn exactly what that meant. For the next few days, he couldn't stop thinking about that contract. It stayed on his desk, highlighted in different colors, every section carefully studied. The more he read, the clearer it became. The HOA wasn't doing anything illegal, but the system they built left room for clever moves. It was all about who controlled the contract. If he could change that, he could change everything. He started small. One morning he called the landscaping company again, this time being direct. The same cheerful voice answered. "Hi," he said, trying to sound casual. "I'm actually part of a neighborhood HOA, and I'm curious, how does someone go about getting a quote for a full community landscaping service?" The woman explained that they usually sent an inspector to review the property, and then made a proposal. She offered to set up a visit. He agreed, giving his address and pretending it was for a different community project. When the inspector arrived, a middle-aged man with a friendly smile, they walked around the neighborhood together. The inspector talked about grass types, seasonal maintenance, and community appeal. It all sounded normal, but the man was thinking beyond lawns. He was thinking about power. As they stood near the park, the inspector mentioned how the HOA was a long-term client. "They've been with us for years," he said proudly. "They pay on time and follow every detail. Makes our job easier." He nodded, pretending to admire the park. "So if, say, someone else wanted to handle that contract, how would that work?" The inspector laughed. "You mean like another company taking over?" "Not exactly," he said slowly. "I mean if someone wanted to buy the service and own it instead of hire it." The inspector blinked, surprised. "You mean you'd want to buy our business?" He shrugged. "Maybe not the whole business. Just the contract." The inspector smiled politely, probably thinking it was a joke. But when he saw the serious look on the man's face, his tone changed. "Well, that would depend on the owner," he said carefully. "But the contract's up for renewal soon. If you're really interested, you could talk to him." That night, he sat in his living room staring at his phone. The idea seemed ridiculous. One person buying a landscaping service that handled an entire community. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. The HOA used his homeowner fees to pay the company. If he took control of that, they couldn't fine him anymore. They'd have to deal with him as a client, not as a problem. The next morning, he called again and asked to speak with the owner. The man on the other end sounded busy but curious. They talked for nearly half an hour. He explained that he was a homeowner who'd had issues with his HOA, and was exploring a business opportunity. He didn't hide his frustration with how things were run. The owner listened quietly and then said, "We don't usually sell our contracts, but we do sell service branches. If you're serious, I can show you some numbers." That's when it got real. They met 2 days later at a small office on the edge of town. The owner was straightforward. The branch that handled his community wasn't huge but brought in steady money. It was more than he'd ever thought of spending, but it wasn't impossible. He had savings and he knew how to manage people. It was risky, but so was doing nothing. Over the next week, he ran the numbers again and again. It was bold, maybe even crazy, but something inside him refused to back down. He'd worked hard all his life, always played by the rules, and this was the first time he felt like he could flip the script. Instead of being a target, he could be the one holding the clipboard. He signed the papers 2 weeks later. Just like that, he became the new owner of the local landscaping service that worked with his HOA. The previous owner promised a smooth transition. He met the employees, a handful of gardeners, drivers, and supervisors. They were kind, hard-working people who just wanted steady work. When he told them he'd be keeping everyone, they smiled in relief. His first official day was a quiet one. He sat in the small office, surrounded by folders and invoices, feeling a mix of excitement and disbelief. He owned the very company that the HOA depended on. It felt like holding the key to a locked door, but he wasn't out for revenge. He just wanted fairness, and maybe a little poetic justice. When the HOA board learned about the change in ownership, they didn't know what to make of it. The letter from the company simply said, "Under new management." That week, he noticed how the golf cart slowed down when passing his house, how the board members whispered more than usual. They didn't know yet who the new owner was. He kept it that way for a while. The company continued its regular work, trimming bushes, mowing lawns, keeping the park clean. Everything ran smoothly. No more orange notices appeared in his mailbox. In fact, no one in the community got any violation notices for weeks. It was the quietest the neighborhood had been in months. He started visiting job sites, checking lawns, and talking to residents. Some of them recognized him and looked surprised to see him with the workers. He would just smile and say, "Helping out." The more he got involved, the more he realized how unnecessary all the stress had been. People didn't need rules shouted at them. They needed respect. A month passed before the next HOA meeting. He attended like before, sitting quietly in the back. When the board began discussing the landscaping renewal, the president cleared his throat and said, "We've been informed the company is under new ownership. We'll need to meet with them soon." That was his cue. He stood up slowly and said, "No need to schedule a meeting. I'm already here." The room fell silent. The president frowned. "Excuse me?" He smiled calmly. "I'm the new owner." The room buzzed with whispers. The president's face went pale. "That's impossible." "I assure you it's not," he said. "I finalized everything last month. I thought it would be polite to continue serving the neighborhood without any interruptions." No one spoke for a long time. Finally, someone in the back laughed softly. Then another person clapped. Before long, half the room was smiling. Even those who didn't like HOA drama couldn't help but admire the cleverness of it. The president tried to regain control, but the atmosphere had already shifted. People were whispering things like, "He actually did it," and "Now that's how you handle an HOA." He didn't brag. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded and said, "I'm just here to make sure everyone's lawn looks good, including mine." That night, he sat on his porch, looking out over his neatly trimmed yard. The air was still, the street quiet. For the first time since moving in, he felt free. Not because he'd broken the rules, but because he'd learned how to live above them, fairly, smartly, and without anger. The game had changed, and now, he was the one holding the cards. After the night of the HOA meeting, things around the neighborhood started to feel different. People looked at him with a mix of curiosity and respect. Some stopped by his house to ask if it was true that he owned the landscaping service now. He would smile and nod, never making a big deal out of it. He didn't want to show off. He only wanted peace and maybe to prove a quiet point. For the next few weeks, he kept the company running smoothly. He made sure every worker got fair pay and clear schedules. They no longer rushed through lawns to meet strict HOA timelines. Instead, they took their time, making sure each yard looked neat and cared for. Homeowners began to notice. For the first time, no one complained about unfair warnings or random fines. The lawns looked better than ever, but more importantly, people seemed happier. The HOA board, however, didn't share that happiness. The president, who once ruled the meetings like a general, now looked uneasy every time he saw him. The board had lost control of something they once used to keep everyone in line. But there was nothing they could do. The landscaping contract had already been renewed under his ownership, and all the terms were in place. One sunny afternoon, as he was checking the flower beds near the community park, the president walked up to him. His tone was polite, but his eyes carried tension. "Mind if we talk?" the president asked. He nodded. "Sure." They walked along the path, passing by children playing and people walking their dogs. The president cleared his throat. "I'll be honest," he said. "You've caused quite a stir. The board isn't sure what to make of this situation." "I haven't caused anything," he replied calmly. "I just bought a business. The same one that's been serving this neighborhood for years." The president frowned. "But don't you see the conflict here? You're both a homeowner and a contractor now." "That's right," he said, still calm. "And maybe that's a good thing. I live here, so I actually care how the place looks. Isn't that what the HOA wants?" The president didn't respond right away. He looked around as if searching for something to say. "Just remember," he said finally, "we still have authority over community decisions." He smiled. "Of course you do. I'm just here to make sure everyone's lawn stays green." The president didn't like that answer, but he couldn't argue with it. He gave a tight smile and walked away. That small encounter told him everything he needed to know. The board didn't know how to handle someone they couldn't control. Over time, the mood in the neighborhood continued to shift. People started decorating their yards more freely. Some added small garden lights or colorful plants that hadn't been allowed before. The board sent out reminders about maintaining community harmony, but no one seemed afraid anymore. Even the older residents who once stayed quiet now smiled when they saw him. He had unknowingly become a kind of symbol, someone who had stood up without shouting, someone who had changed the rules without breaking them. The workers under his company loved the new atmosphere too. They said it was nice to work where people actually appreciated their efforts. He made sure to treat them well, offering breaks and bonuses for good work. He remembered how unfair it had felt to be treated like a number, and he refused to do that to anyone else. One evening, as he was going over invoices, one of his crew members stopped by the office. "Boss," the man said, "you know something. People really like what you've done here. Nobody's scared of those HOA folks anymore." He smiled at that. "Good," he said. "That means we're doing our job right." But behind that satisfaction, he knew there was still tension brewing. The HOA board wasn't finished. They started finding small ways to push back. They questioned invoices, delayed payments, and even suggested new rules about contractor transparency. He saw it all for what it was, an attempt to remind him who was supposed to be in charge. He didn't fight back. Instead, he did what he always did best. He stayed calm and thought ahead. Every delay, every letter they sent, he responded to with professionalism. If they wanted a report, he gave them one. If they wanted proof of services, he provided photos and dates. Every time they tried to corner him, he gave them nothing to use against him. A few weeks later, the community held its annual Spring Beautification Day. It was a big event where everyone worked together to clean up the park, plant flowers, and make the place look perfect. The HOA usually led the event, but this year something different happened. The residents came to him first. They asked if his company could organize the work, bring tools, assign areas, and guide people on what to do. He agreed happily. When the day arrived, the park buzzed with laughter and energy. Kids planted flowers while adults painted benches. His workers helped everyone, smiling and chatting as if they were neighbors, not just employees. The president and the board members showed up halfway through. They looked around, surprised to see everything running so smoothly without their supervision. The park was cleaner, brighter, and livelier than it had ever been. People waved at him and thanked him for putting it all together. The president stood off to the side, silent. At the end of the day, everyone gathered around for pictures. Someone handed him the microphone to say a few words. He hesitated, then smiled and said, "I'm glad to see everyone enjoying their homes again. That's what this place should be about. Pride, not pressure." The crowd cheered. The president forced a polite smile, but his eyes told another story. That night, as he packed up the tools, he realized the balance of power had shifted for good. The HOA still had rules on paper, but the community's respect had moved elsewhere. A few days later, he got a letter from the board. It was short and formal. The president was stepping down. The note didn't say why, but everyone in the neighborhood already knew. A new election would be held soon, and for the first time, people actually seemed interested in joining the board. They wanted to make it fair again. When one of his neighbors asked if he would run for president, he just laughed. "No," he said. "I think I'll stick to the grass." The following week, he took a slow walk through the streets. The lawns were neat, the flowers blooming, and kids played freely in the yards. No bright orange papers anywhere. No whispered complaints. Just peace. The kind of peace that comes when people stop fearing the rules and start living like a community again. He didn't need recognition. The quiet satisfaction of seeing his plan work was enough. For once, the neighborhood looked perfect. Not because it had to, but because everyone wanted it to. Months passed, and life in the neighborhood settled into a calm rhythm. The lawn stayed neat, the flowers bright, and the air felt lighter somehow. People who had once avoided each other now stopped to chat by their driveways. Kids played without being told to stay off the grass, and weekend barbecues had returned. It was the kind of peaceful normalcy that no rule book could ever create.